I've worked in tech for 25 years. Giles and I are going to have a conversation around legacy modernization and sort of all the potential branches on the back of the in data and AI tech. We have an investment firm investing in early stage tech companies, and we're building AI first companies. So it's interesting. Erin said that, so it's really useful. And as Barry said, we were talking about this topic, and he said, "Oh, come and do this session." And I said, "Fine, I'll be happy to do that." And I've roped in Giles because I know Giles, and Giles and I have done other things before together. And we do have a good bit of banter. So I thought I'd get Giles in for us to have that discussion. But also, obviously, chip in. Anybody. This is not a broadcast from us. This is a conversation and discussion. So everybody can make a comment apart from Lyndon. No, this is not Lyndon. No, I'm kidding, mate. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You can say anything. Lyndon and I have known each other for about 20 years, so I could be rude to him if I like. Um, and yeah, you're welcome to put questions. I mean, maybe the best way to do it, if you have questions, just stick them on the chat, and then we can take them. Either myself and Giles can answer them, or anybody can take the answers if they're interested. So, Giles, go ahead, mate.
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to meet you all. I've probably met some of you at other events. Like Alpesh says, known the man for some time. We've done a number of panels over the last few years. As he says, we always have great banter in the mix as well. Thanks, obviously, to Barry and Chelsea for having me as well. Barry, God knows how many years I've known you, young man. A long time. Yeah, today, I do a lot of interim and fractional CIO, CTO work. And today I'm currently the Chief Information and Technology Officer of a fast growing startup in California. So in the prop tech sector, never been in that sector before. So looking forward to it. For my sins, I am also an agile instructor and an author. So I had a #1 best-selling book out last year, which I know some of the team know about. Yeah, great to be here. Great to obviously share some insights and some stories and some anecdotes with you all as well. And just to sort of also help share a bit of a different lens on some of the stuff that we are going to be talking about today from a kind of risk perspective as well, perhaps from a governance and ethics perspective as well. So I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. Oh, somebody wants your book.
Oh,
Send him a
okay.
link with a 90% discount code.
That was going to be my second bit. Where's the discount?
This is free advertising for his book.
This link has a 60% discount code. I'm not kidding. It has a 60% discount code. There you go. Go fill your boots.
So let's get going then. So as I'm sure all of us have heard, right? This Gen AI stuff has gone crazy over the last couple of years, and for me, what I look for is where can you use this technology? How can you change? I mean, as I'm sure all of us know, the every business, every industry, every part of every business is going to change over the next few years, and these new technologies are really going to impact everyone. And it's quite interesting because Barry talked about the unconference and whatever, and we've done some. I did a couple of did an unconference last week and a month ago, and it's quite interesting because a lot of people, almost all people in the session weren't working with LLMs. If they were, they weren't saying. And then part of the conversation that we had and a couple of the networking sessions was around, well, hey, we're all CTOs, we're all trying to think about how technology can help. And one of the biggest areas which all of us have worked with in some shape or form is legacy and legacy software. And large organizations out there have, the largest of the large organizations have hundreds of millions of lines of code of systems that they frankly don't know how they work. And as we come into this new era around data as well and using data and AI, one of the challenges is how do I extract all the knowledge, all the business logic, all the data models, all the code, and obviously fixed data as well, because all those two big chunks of things are going to help rebuild systems. So we've got like four topics. One we're going to talk about is just opportunities in legacy modernization, the things around critical challenges. So what are the challenges around that? And obviously we'd love to get your perspectives on it. The third one is really the sort of nascent area of best practices in this area. I mean, there aren't any best practices yet because it's all new, but what kind of best practices that could be created to help that happen? And then some of the future trends that we're seeing around the area, and then we'll potentially have some questions at the end. But as I said earlier, I'm happy to take questions as we go through the conversation. So, Giles, given that you want to sort of give a broad overview, why don't you do that? Why don't you start?
Yeah, I mean, this is something. I mean, look, it's this conversation we're having today is obviously stemmed from that COBOL conversation that Barry and Alpesh and others were having previously at the previous event. This is something that we have been doing at the startup I am at. Starting to get obviously LLMs more involved in the actual development phase of the products that we've been creating. And what's nice, this is the very first company I've been at with sort of as a real greenfield project, being able to build out an AI first system, first off a B2B SaaS solution, sometime possibly later this year, early 26, there'll be a B2C solution that comes out of it as well. But we are using these technologies to help automate, not necessarily in our instance code migration as such, but certainly sort of the code review phases in the process in the SDLC as well. And it's actually funny because in some ways it's actually slowed us down. And I was having this conversation with Alpesh earlier. You know, we can't necessarily say off the bat that we can trust what these tools are actually going to do for us as an organization, as an industry. And as such, we know part of standard software development lifecycle, peer code reviews going in-seat testing, whatever that phase may actually be. And what we've now got is we've now got obviously LLMs trying to do this in seconds rather than minutes or hours, but we still need humans in the loop afterwards to do that, to check that the AI has actually done it well enough that we can sign off on that review being done by the LLM in the first place. So, we're getting very good data from it. We're getting very good feedback from the engineering team and the QA team, the DevOps engineers as well. We are seeing obviously low defect rates happening because of it as well. We're seeing fixes being done very quickly by the engineers. So, there will be ultimately this balance. Today it's probably very early. And I know Alpesh has been doing some great work into this to actually start building some capabilities from this kind of proper legacy translation piece, which I think is going to be very valuable for us. We were having this conversation at the event yesterday, weren't we? With the system that had the tool over it for 3 weeks, looking at all the business cases and the business logic, being able to actually reverse engineer a system that could no longer be actually developed on by any existing engineers because everyone else had left the business.
Yeah, so I mean, if we take sort of the basics, right? The basics are there's large amounts in medium and large enterprises, there's large amounts of technology and systems. If they're all been built in-house, invariably documentation isn't great, architecture shit. You use a legacy language or an old language like COBOL. We talked about COBOL, but it could be .NET, it could be Visual Basic. I mean, name your language. I mean, it even could be using Python. I mean, it doesn't matter. I think the challenge is that I've seen, and I obviously love to get your views on it, is these systems are not ready for tomorrow. They're not ready for the new architecture, new systems approaches. And if you want to be if you want to take existing code, so like if you guys have worked in banks, I know Lyndon has, and I have, there's COBOL. We talked about COBOL as let's just take the case in point on COBOL. Large banks have core banking systems that have millions of lines of COBOL, which frankly they don't really know how they work. And they've got legacy systems. So one of the banks that I'm dealing with at the moment has a reporting system which is 25 years old. And it's evolved over the years, and it's all just been put together, and the documentation isn't there. They don't really understand the business logic that's there. They don't really understand how it hangs together because, frankly, nobody drew a decent architecture diagram of the system. And so the challenge is, how the hell do you take that and rebuild it? Now, what I've seen is, organizations going, you know what, I'm not touching this. What I'm going to try and do, one of the things that's happening in the last few years is cloud migration, moving from on-premise to cloud. And what I've seen is a lot of firms just doing cloud migration, lift and shift, rather than actually rewrite or re-architect. People are doing lots of lift and shift. And I know one of my mates is head of cloud architecture at Deutsche Bank. They literally just doing lift and shift of applications, hundreds and hundreds of them, literally not touching how they work, but actually trying to re-architect, re-platform them on GCP. And for me, it's like, what's the point? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just think about how the applications work and rewrite them? And that's a hard challenge, right? I know from historic, and anecdotal evidence and people that I've spoken to, if a traditional vendor will go in and say, well, and this particular one that I'm talking about, they had other vendors in and they said, oh, that'd be 3 years to migrate. There's another, I'll give you another real example. There's a private equity firm that I've been dealing with, and one of the portfolio companies has 7 million lines of PHP code. And can you imagine trying to migrate 7 million lines of PHP into a modern architecture and modern system? Well, frankly, until recently, you would not do it because the ROI wouldn't stack up. So that's one of the challenges. It's things like risk. So if you've got legacy applications, I don't know if anybody here from legacy software companies, I don't know if I should name them, but Talend, Informatica, and there's a lot of them, right? So if you imagine something like Informatica has got 10,000, 20,000, tens of thousands of customers. If they're of any size, most firms are like, we're not touching it. We're not touching it. We want to get rid of it, but we're not going to do it because we don't know how it works. And the ROI to migrate, we need to migrate off it. The ROI, the risk, the redevelopment cost, etc., just would not hang together. And so these problems are perennial. They haven't gone away. People want to get rid of legacy, but the reality is they can't. They can't do it. They can't actually. They can't actually get rid of it. And so, well, what's the solution? And I've been working in sort of data and AI for a long time, and the LLM stuff came along 2.5 years ago, and I started looking at this stuff, thinking, well, what can we do? And over the last 9 months, this particular opportunity in one of the banks came along, and I thought, actually, you know what? LLMs could do this a lot. And so what we've been looking at is how do you, for example, understand a code base, and not just the code, but actually the data model, store procedures, interfaces. And there's a lot, as I'm sure all of us know, there's a lot of different parts of this. Barry said he spent 14 years migrating legacy. There you go. Barry Flaherty. Barry? I'd love to get your perspective in a minute. So I'd love to get your perspective on it. So what I've seen in terms of the testing we've done is actually, you know what? These LLMs can even just using this, not even doing anything sophisticated, just taking one of the sort of existing models like the Anthropics or OpenAI or whatever, and just like pushing stuff through it and see what happens. What can you extract from this? And Gemini is another one. And we've had phenomenal results. I mean, not doing anything sophisticated or planned out, but phenomenal results in terms of uncovering legacy code and what it does. So Barry, go on, mate. I'd love to get your perspective. You spent 14 years doing it, so go on.
So I joined Jitterbit, 2012, and that's when we were an on-prem client server solution. Then we took our funding from Salesforce and so on, and everything became multi-tenant cloud. But a lot of the banks, insurance companies, South Africa is a good case in point. They've been running AS400 and mainframe stuff forever, and it's been running, and they don't want you to touch it. So it's as much a mindset as well for a lot of these companies, as much as a technical. So there's lots of fiefdoms around legacy data and stuff, to your point. But absolutely, there's just lots of technical debt out there still. And I think once you hit that financial services vertical, as you said, that haven't grown up as, cloud native, that's really, that's the battleground. So it's building that business case, isn't it? And even old ERP systems and Sage and stuff rolling back 5-10 years, not everything's the shiny new cloud version, is it?
Yeah.
And we wrestle with that for years, but these technologies have been around for a long time now. iPaaS, and now it's automation iPaaS, and now it's AI. There's just an evolution of stuff, right? But ultimately, it's taking unstructured data, messy data, legacy data, running it through platforms around iPaaS where there's data chunking, parallel processing, so you can run big data sets in as well.
So here's a question for you, Giles, mate.
Okay.
Right? Given that you've been CTO, CIO for many companies, and how do you think about if you had legacy shit, lots of legacy? What's your view? What's your view been and your experience been about saying, you know what, we need to dump legacy, and how have you gone about in the past saying we've got to get rid of this? It's mission critical, but we can't. Frankly, it's had its day. We need to replace this thing. How has it gone with the senior execs and the board to get budget to try and make this happen? So what sort of cycle, if you have, when you've done that, you're going, hey, this is end of life. We really need to replace it. And you go to the board. What have you had in terms of dialogue and conversation to try and persuade the board to do something? And has it worked or not? And if it's worked, how? And if not, what have been the issues?
I'm going to say it's going to have to be a mixed bag, as probably many will have experienced themselves over the years, right? The number of times that you arrive at an organization, and I'm normally arriving because, as I say, in the interim fractional space, something's hit the fan and something needs to be fixed. And I'm going to try and lead on that change to happen within the organization. But sometimes, that they are really risk averse to me wanting. I saw someone mentioned in the chat earlier, Alex mentioned about a manager loving switching off systems because he knew it meant less work in the future. I've worked with organizations like that. They're kind of going, we don't need it any longer, just switch it off. We got to rebuild it, we got to rewrite it. And I'm going, great, give me the team, give me the money. And they're kind of going, no, we haven't got any for you. And these are the days long before AI has been around where we've got this new supporting capability. To your point, Alpesh, we would probably hire in before turning something off, especially something that's end of life. It's not a case of if you've sort of previously had an SAP system and then you have to suddenly automatically go to SAP for HANA, right? You don't necessarily have to do that. But what happened was we'd always have to hire in process experts, business analysts to come in and actually, create documentation around what the system was actually doing before we either rewrote it or turned this thing off. 9 times out of 10, most members of Exco or the board would want to have a replacement system, as part of the USP of the business. So they need to see actually that something's going to continue working. But so many times I've arrived in organizations, the architect's no longer there, the documentation doesn't exist. You try and ask some of the senior architects that are in the organization to reverse engineer the process, the product, whatever the capability is, and they physically can't. We end up spending oodles of money trying to actually do this and end up often in abject failure. So
the question I have,
I'm
is,
really happy that we've got the capabilities to fix this now.
but the question I have is when you go to as a CIO going to a board, and this question is for everybody, right? If anybody wants to answer, just put a comment in. I think there's quite a lot of people. There's 51 people, so you won't be able to put your hand up. But if you want to chip in, please do.
100%.
Go into the board and say, hey, I'm a medium-sized organization. I've got this system I've had for 10 years. I need to replace it. And the board goes, you need to replace that system. And you go and say, well, that'll be 10 million. How do you decide how to scope it out and scale out and how much it's going to cost and time and risk. And how do you present that? And what's the reaction been with the board? Giles, but anybody else, if you've been through
let's get Srinivas in. He's got his hand up, so let's get him in the
Go
conversation.
ahead, yeah.
He's just added actually a very good comment in
Srinivas, go ahead,
in
man.
the chat.
Yeah. Hey, this is my first meeting here. Thanks, everyone. So my name is Srini. I'm the CEO of Cloud Seeds. So it's a very good discussions to the point. So this is one of the very tricky question every time we faced while submitting RFPs or anywhere when the discussion comes around the legacy system migrations, right? What we are thinking in the other way around is like the more we are thinking all the infrastructure on the legacy side, there should be a way where we can adopt some kind of digital twin simulation methods without touching the exact hardware infrastructure, how you can define the ROIs and the risk involved in with along with the impact assessment. So that's where it's one of the most important thing that which we should also be thinking about it. What you say, Giles or anyone, I'm open for the thoughts around it, because the critical challenge we always have in the legacy migrations here is lack of the documentation, or maybe the architects might have left, or could be around some of the risk and the compliances involved everywhere around. So if the solution towards the digital twin simulations can be a workaround for it, if that can be replicated, that if can be rightly sized and modeling, if that can be rightly done with some modeling exercises, that could be a way forward for the legacy migrations.
Cool. Let's move on to, I mean, I think unless there's any more comments, Giles, from you, anybody else about the challenges, I think we're pretty aware of the challenges, right? We've all been there going into organizations and looking at legacy and going, this pile of shit, we need to replace it, right?
One thing we should just want to say is
please.
rather than this, not just thinking about the systems, right?
Yeah.
And I quickly mentioned it earlier. Obviously, we've talked about documentation gaps and missing documentation and missing architecture information as well in the mix. No wikis around. The other one is obviously data as well. We haven't sort of really mentioned that, and the reconciliation that's required on that, and the systems involved in that as well. And whether we've got any data dictionaries which actually can support us in the same vein as well. So it's not just always coding or systems, integrations, orchestrations, whatever that may be. It's also, we got to think about the documentation and the data in the mix at the same time.
Cool. Any more on that topic? If you have, please, I think all of us understand the challenges of legacy. I guess the next sort of, we've got half an hour left, so it'd be useful now to talk about really how can you do this? How can you migrate systems, and how do large language models and other tools around that, other capabilities, let's call them capabilities rather than tools, can help do that? And from the kind of things that we've been seeing, being an architect, I look at this from an architect perspective rather than a software engineer, a dev perspective. If you have a software architecture of a system, generally software architectures are actually not known. So one of the things for me is to say, hey, you know what? Can we take the code base, and obviously larger code base is a larger problem. So if you've got a code base of 10,000 lines of code, you can today tokenize that, push it through an LLM, and you can do it, right? It's okay. The caching size is big enough now to take that kind of stuff. I think Gemini, have 2 million token limit. So if you imagine, that's probably at the top end, and there's other caching and other techniques on memory that you can use to scale up to tens of millions of tokens. So one of the things is, how do you take a code base and extract what the hell it does? So obviously the bigger the code base, the bigger the problem. But one of the things for me is being able to take that code base using large language models and what's called, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but I'll talk about it. And if you're welcome to ask questions, but something called the RAG process, retrieval augmented generation process, where you take the code base, you effectively extract chunks of the code. And how you do that, there's a whole set of data science and other models where you do what's called chunking. And the larger the code base, the bigger the problem. And obviously the kind of things you're working at, for example, a dependency graph as an example of the code. There's companies like SourceGraph, for example, if you've seen those guys, where you can fire your code base at it and it'll draw a nice graph of all the code and all the dependencies and the functions. So, you know, that there's these artifacts that you can build in preparation for pushing it through, trying to understand the code. So so there are limitations to this, which are the size of the token size that you can actually push through an LLM, the speed and the cost. Obviously, the bigger the size, the bigger the cost in terms of actually finding out information about that particular code base. There's issues around what prompts do you use? So how do you build a prompt, a set of prompts to extract the right information out of the code? And how do you then examine the code? I think somebody mentioned in the chat, you know, do you break this down into little steps? You know, do you break this down into little steps? I would say, I think Rich Carlson said there on the chat, I'd say absolutely. But the question comes down to if you're pushing in code, how do you chunk it up into logical functions or components or whatever else, right? So the interesting thing is, and we're doing this, right? We're experimenting with this stuff to try to find the best process, the best tooling, the best LLMs, because for me, it's not one LLM rules them all. You find one of the things that we did internally is do an eval of about 19 different models on code gen and system generation. So doing an eval process to figure out which model works best for which use case is one of the things for me is you have to do that because, like, for example, if you've got a domain, if you're thinking about a domain like banking, all LLMs are not going to understand banking that well. You've got to find a model or models and then a process around those to decide actually for a banking domain, this model, this stack is going to work. And I dread to say the word agent, but I'm going to say it because lots of people are talking about agents. For me, agents are just an app. But hey, the important thing here is that at the moment, the way that we're doing it is trying to experiment with what is the right process, what are the tools, what are the capabilities, what are the artifacts that you need to take account of, and the process in terms of the foundation pieces. I mentioned an example around dependency graphs of the code base, for example. Getting the metadata out of the code, getting all the variables. And there's a lot of getting the entity relationships and the data model out. So, that's interesting. It says we've used strangulation pattern to help migrate. Alistair, you there, mate?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Go ahead, please. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so particularly, a useful approach has been to try and run systems in parallel,
Right.
of course, but kind of bite off chunks at a time. It's been pretty difficult, especially when we are migrating data models.
Yeah.
So it's quite, we're getting the nuts and bolts of this now, but like using views as a way to build some kind of adapters around legacy data models. And to try and migrate small chunks of processes and functionality one at a time. But our challenge has always been that operationally running this in a hybrid mode, there's lots of things to go wrong, data moving around, things not quite working as expected. So
you mentioned the strangulation pattern. What's that?
I think it comes from Martin Fowler of somebody in ThoughtWorks around kind of migrating from a legacy system to a new system by biting off small chunks at a time and running in a hybrid manner.
Cool. I mean, Alistair, have you used large language models to do some of this work?
I mean, we are trying to do that now. Yes. I mean, this is we've been working on migrations for a long time, as many others here have.
And what have you got any insights you could share?
On LLMs specifically for migration.
Yeah.
Certainly understanding code bases, it seems to be pretty effective. But I think it's really early days. I mean, we're trying to experiment as much as possible, and that's why it's really interesting to hear other people's experiences in this, because it's a lot of migration needs to happen, right?
Absolutely.
Modernization. It's kind of the evolution of the systems of humanity.
Giles, mate.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, the one thing, and there's been some great questions around even stuff like data privacy earlier. Darminder in the chat was asking this as well. And it's got to be all about risk appetite with this stuff. If we're going to start looking at best practices for success right now, we've got to make sure there are still humans in the loop for reviewing architecture output, right? Code output, automation test output, to make sure. There's going to be so many new capabilities we can use these LLMs for to help us in the SDLC. But right now, it's all about our risk appetite. And someone else has mentioned return on investment for doing this work as well. And I love the just looking at the Martin Fowler Strangler pattern as well, and that looks awesome. But we've got to make sure we have humans in the loop. From the data, I was going to say just quickly, apologies, Barry, just before you come in, I was going to say we've got to make sure that you've got the right governance policies in place in your organization before you suddenly start using these LLMs, right? And it's making sure it's not just an oversight, it's a proper usage policy as well for your organization at the same time, covering off areas like data policies, privacy policies, information security policies, your ethical guidelines for actually using these tools in the first place to do this job, the code of conduct, making sure that they actually are going to be, if you've got coding standards and best practices and architecture practices, they're following all of those as well in the organization. There's also the training and development for getting people up to speed to use these tools in the first place. So, there's a proper piece of oversight that has to be done just simply before going in, rushing in head first and using an LLM with your SDLC. So, from my perspective, there's a lot of stuff you need to do early and first before you can actually get the wins as
yeah, I
early
mean,
as well.
so for me, this is the kind of things that we're working on is what is the process? Can you build a standardized process to do this? Obviously Martin Fowler's articles is fantastic, but I guess the things he's talking about are using traditional approaches, quotes traditional meaning non-LLM approaches, to do migration. The advent of large language models and the power of these things for me is a whole change on how you do this. And it's as Giles said, it's not just the technology, it's the process around it, it's the artifacts, it's
100%.
how do you build the prompts to extract the right content. So I mentioned a second ago about being able to actually feed a code base of any size through an LLM, because the token size and the caching is just not there to take in 100 million lines of code. How do you break that down into chunks that you can actually feed through the process? How do you vectorize and store that and examine that? And frankly, one of the things that we're working on is how do you then regenerate? How do you could build the system? How do you redo the data model, right? So for me, I think it's doable. We're experimenting with it. What we've done internally is actually, frankly, use some of you are, I think some of you at the unconference when I talked about formal methods and formal specification languages. And so these techniques have been around for years, but frankly, nobody really uses them, but for me, because I studied this stuff. So for me, there's so much that how you do it is new. How you actually do it is evolving. I can't say to you today, here's the process, 1, 2, 3, 4. But what we're doing is experiment to figure out how we can do it to scale with an ROI, because let's be honest, large language models are going to replace large numbers of systems over the next few years. The way you build enterprise AI stack, they're going to replace these systems.
Sure.
So if you're going to replace these systems, you need a way of extracting the business logic, the value, the IP in these systems that exist. And unless you can do that, this adoption of the new enterprise AI stack isn't going to get adopted that quickly. So what we're trying to do, and if any of you have done it, absolutely. If any of you tried to use LLMs and experimented with it, I'd love to hear what kind of results you're getting. But for us, for me, this is a new way of migrating software, building software extracting value, extracting the IP that a business has in these systems. And honestly, we're just trying to experiment with this stuff right at the moment because we've got clients coming in on our stuff where they said we want to rebuild the system. Like, okay, well, how do you do this? And literally, we said, okay, we're going to use LLMs to do it. What are the steps? And we've evolved some process, and obviously we're iterating to it to be able to do it to scale. Now, I don't know whether we can build a standard process. And what we're building is one of my companies, we're building tooling infrastructure. So, you know, this is not bespoke processes, but building tooling infrastructure that you can use. But is there a way of taking existing practices like the strangler? I didn't know about the strangler practice. I'll have to look at that. But and other practices that you can adapt to do the migrations. And for me, that's what we're experimenting with. And I think, you know, I'm an entrepreneur, right? So for me, I'm thinking this is a multi-tens of billions of opportunity if you can do it. Because if you can do that, we'll accelerate how you can replace legacy systems. We'll get rid of legacy software and legacy vendors. We'll be able to actually adopt this new kind of architecture and new kind of systems approach. And there'll be Nirvana. Giles, Nirvana.
It will be.
We'll all be out of jobs, actually. You know, obviously,
Yeah, precisely. Well, let's hope not. Hey,
wasn't it? Sam Altman saying, or somebody was saying that actually all software is going to build by AI by end of next year. We don't need any developers anymore. I don't believe that, but somebody.
Yeah, no, I don't believe this either. It's a form of scaremongering at the end of the day. It's not a case of if this is going to happen. It will be a case of when. The sort of whole paradigm behind software engineering and architecture and everything that goes with it in an SDLC will change. AI will fundamentally rewrite the rule book. Everything that we've been doing for decades and decades, and I've been a software engineer since the late 80s, early 90s, and I can tell you it's changing everything that my teams are doing today. The point is we've got to make sure we're doing it right. We've got to make sure it's ethically the right thing to be doing with the right protections in place. As I was saying earlier, making sure we got the right policies as well. It's exciting, and we shouldn't stop, obviously trying to use tools like Alpesh and his team are building out. But at the same time, we should be wearing a bit of a risk hat and making sure that we are still applying the proper architecture standards, organizational standards, engineering standards to what we are trying to deliver. And if it's still not right for us to not use an AI tool to reverse engineer something, the cost benefit analysis is not in our favor to do it, we don't do it. We don't have to do these things. But the fact that we've now got these tools, we were listening to at a conference yesterday where an agentic AI application was actually sat listening to a tool for 3 weeks, trying to learn the business process of it, because this particular system had no documentation whatsoever, and yet it needed to be brought into the 21st century. And just the smarts that were done by that, this dumb system sat in the background watching everything that was going on, writing up the business processes, and that actually allowed the team to create a brand new version very quickly from something which no one left in the organization really knew anything about. So there are some real wins if we do this stuff right, but we've got to make sure we've got a risk hat on at the same time so that we aren't going to suddenly go blindly down an alleyway or a rabbit hole and really start screwing everything up. I guarantee you companies will do it. I'm sure over the next 6 to 12 to 18 months, we'll hear of organizations who do this and mess up their entire business model and potentially, knock themselves out of the industry because of it. So watch this space.
Robin, you made a comment. I'd love to get the sort of words behind that, mate.
Yeah. I think what we've got is this is a room filled with CTOs. You've got a parallel room of CFOs who are funding technology, and you've got a parallel room of CROs who are generating business lines off of the back of the technology that's underpinned. And it's really a question about, what are the links between within the organization? Are you talking about a giant elephant-like mainframe system where nobody knows how the front leg connects to the back leg and how it walks, if you'll excuse the extension of the analogy? And, are you trying to, eat this elephant, or are you talking about a pre-butchered pile of elephants that, again, extending the analogy, are you talking about a lift, have you already lifted and shifted and that, system A aligns to business line A and system B aligns to business line, B, right? What kind of pre-work's already been, undertaken here? The way you solve that is by going down the straight up Wardley map process, and you say, this is the business line, this is the user needs that is being served, and this is where the overlay of business line A maps to business line B, and where the costs are attached. It's about cost attribution of your system into your finance, line of business.
Well, I think Mr. Wardley will be happy because I know Simon. I've known him for a long time.
Yeah.
I'll mention Wardley maps.
Yeah.
So you've been very quiet, mate. Sorry, go ahead. Have you finished, Rob?
Well, I was going to say that yes, you've got Wardley mapping, but it's just straight standard value chain mapping lined up against a commoditization spectrum. I'm not going to say like Wardley mapping is the only way to do a value chain map, but these are standard straight technology strategy toolkits, and if we're not using them, then we're leaving ourselves open to be blindsided by the finance and the people who fund the finance team. The revenue lines. I like lift and shift. I like lift and shift because it allows you to atomize your.
Really?
I like lift and shift because it allows you to atomize the services that you're offering to specific lines of business. You can say this service, rather than saying my IT estate now costs me 20 million a year, I know that this service costs me 20,000 pounds a year, whereas this other service costs me 200,000 pounds a year, and I can say, well, equal revenue, I'm going to invest in carving off the 200,000 pound a year or the 2 million pound a year system versus this thing that is cheap and low usage and very cheap to run. That's how I prioritize it. But all else being equal.
Fantastic. We've got 10 minutes left. As you see, David Scales just mentioned something here. You're welcome to elaborate on that, David. David Scales, you there? If you don't want to, that's okay. But if you want to, we'd love to hear from you. So we've got 10 minutes left. Anybody have any questions? Any more questions? Please put them in the chat. Most of you have not said anything, so I want to get the people who haven't said anything or asked any questions. We've got a group of clever people here and CTOs and others. I'd love to get what your thoughts are. So I guess the basic question is, what do you think? Do you think LLMs can do this, and can they help do the legacy migration? Is the software engineering lifecycle going to change with LLMs?
Yeah.
Oh, go on then. Where are you? Sorry, I had to thought dump running about off cam.
I'll have a go. I'll have a go. Why not? Yeah.
Please go on, mate.
Cool. Thanks. Obviously, traditional strangler fig, test first, good test coverage, migration principles apply, right? So, I've done minor legacy migrations using a little bit of LLM assistance. And it's just all about, I love that, eating the elephant, slicing the elephant, slice at a time approach, right? So firstly, can you make change safely, right? Do you have end-to-end integration, unit testing in place so that you can start to do the elephant butchery, as Robin says? And then, can you slice up the migration or the refactor down into small enough pieces that it does fit into the context window? Because I think you're absolutely right, Alpesh. That's going to be a big challenge if you're trying to do whole code base refactors. For me, the best coding partner for this so far has been Claude Code. I've used pretty much everything now: Bolt, Lovable, Replit, Copilot, Cursor. I haven't used a few others, but Claude Code's great because it has some agency, but it keeps you in the loop. It proactively makes plans and then asks you what you think of those plans, and then sort of keeps you in the loop, but gives you the chance to accept all too. Obviously, really sort of careful checkpointing is important, as always in coding. You know, good commit hygiene, good test hygiene, and obviously running those tests at every checkpoint you're making. So I think the answer is yes. I think I've done it in small scale. I think it's very similar to careful, refactoring and careful strangler fig pattern application. But there's nothing that does it end to end, right? You can't just give it a job and leave it to do it. You know, it's always going to be a co-pilot thing, but you get efficiency gains.
Yeah, cool. Alex, you wanted to chat? Want to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the first thing was I'm sure that there's 50 people on the call. I'm sure we don't all have time to chip in, so some of us are quiet sometimes. I was at Devox conference, which is a Java developer conference for 3 days last week. So what I'm saying now is basically my understanding of their opinions. And yes, LLM generation of code is going to help an awful lot of developers. There's a lot of people who feel that they are actually very much faster than they were. And yes, I can see lots of people quite genuinely able to convert legacy code using LLMs, particularly true where I think it's an old code base and they need to translate it into the appropriate team's language. I think there's lots of people pointing out that it might not be ready for production in circumstances. Examples are like not being able to have it predictably do the same thing every time is one of the things. Selection of your LLM is very important. So it's very interesting that I heard the last speaker say that they tried Claude and they got the best results from that. That was very important. And there's, it's really not as simple as just sending a prompt to ChatGPT and expecting it all to work. It really, really is. There's so much stuff that you need to learn about this to do it properly. Final thing, I will shut up, is, nobody's jobs are going to be disappearing unless there's somebody really making a mistake. What this comes down to is, yes, some developers will be changing the style of certain things, but in reality, what's happening is that developers are able to produce a lot more better code, but they still have to be experts in the language and they still have to be able to pick things up and they still have to be able to produce a test suite and all those sorts of things. And they still have to know about strangler patterns and things like that. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, but thanks very much.
We have 5 minutes left. Giles, last comments?
No, do you know, I put something on there, and something that I don't think we have time for, but I would have loved to have got into the conversation, which is, does anyone have any info about any future trends we haven't discussed here? Again, we want to learn about them. We want our tribe here to help us uncover what other organizations are doing as well. And obviously Alex learnt a lot from going to that conference from the sounds of it. So, are there any other trends that anyone is seeing out there at the moment, tools that they are picking up that they are finding useful from an automation perspective or for any element of the SDLC at all? Ben.
Wait for 10 seconds.
Yeah, I can't vouch for it, but obviously there are higher level tools like Devin and others that are sort of coordinating larger efforts.
What did you say?
Devin is being used by some.
Devin. Cool.
And that coordinates at a higher level.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I've literally, while we've been talking, I've just got, I don't know if you guys have heard of a new editor called Zed. Built-in Rust, 600,000 lines of code, completely open source. So one of the things for me is, actually, are we going to see a change in terms of all of us as, CTOs? Are we going to see a new way of building software? Everybody talks about 10x software engineers and all of that stuff, right? But the reality is this stuff is hard to put into place. And And for me, that's what we're thinking about internally. How do we get 10x SDLC? As I'm sure all of us know, that's not simple. It sounds simple to do, but actually it's bloody complicated to do. And for me, trying to figure that out is actually massively beneficial for the industry. We should maybe get Martin Fowler to talk about it sometime. That'd be a good idea, actually. You get Martin Fowler or somebody else. And how do you build those model agnostic tool sets? So Z is, for example, Z is an editor, but can you create an LLM driven editor? Not like, Cursor is just adding a model in and so add in an app, whatever, right? But actually, fundamentally, how can you, as an example, can you create an LLM driven editor and use that to build stuff and do migration stuff, right? So it's driven from an LLM perspective, the whole thing. And the whole experience around engineers. So engineers are used to using VS Code or JetBrains or whatever it is. But what if actually the coding tools and the system design tools and the processes around that changed? Is that something that could be used to actually do some of these things? So we've run out of time. Thank you everybody for joining and all the participants who commented. I don't know, Chelsea, are you going to do a post?
Yeah, we can put the recording on YouTube.
Yeah, and if you can, if we can put a message on LinkedIn with everybody tagged, and then hopefully we can carry on the discussion. It will be amazing to have people carry on this discussion around this area and see what reaction we get.
We also have the Lunch Club WhatsApp group that can also be used to carry on the discussions after the session. So the link to join that is in the networking document if anyone would like to join the Lunch Club WhatsApp group and carry on the discussion there.
Fantastic. Any more final comments? We've still got 1 minute left. I don't think, Giles, anything else?
No, I mean, just thank you. I mean, I've got a lot of takeaways from the what's been shared in the chat. I've been following the chat the whole way through for the last hour. So thank you very much. I actually have about 7 takeaways of things I'm going to be looking up after this. So thank you very much, everybody. Robin's got his hand up for one last thing.
Oh, I was just going to say that eventually there will be an AI version of every component of SDLC.
Of course, there will be.
And
that's what we're building. So
yeah, so
that's what we're building. So it's great. Thank you mentioned that. So this is not a sales. This is not a sales pitch. And for me, I'm ambitious, right? We want to see. Being a software engineer, and I started coding when I was 13, and I'm not the best coder in the world, right? I'm not going to say I want it easy. I want it to be easy. Anyway, we can make easy. I'd love that.
What I was going to say is there will be an AI version, and there will be a world leader and a bunch of followers, or second place, third place in every element. But it's not going to be the same tool for every element. No. Just like not every tool and not every component has the same. Not every company uses the same component, no. But eventually converge to standard operating practices with tools being subbed in and out depending on your code stack.
Fantastic. Well,
a new front on the fight for standards, I guess.
We're over time. Thanks everybody for joining. If you want to connect to us, well, you can all connect to each other. Obviously, you may already be connected, but if you want to connect, please. There's LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm sure Giles is. Books out there. You can find him, and Giles, you can maybe give your 60% discount code for your book, and maybe you want to.
It's in the link. It's in the link.
Maybe you want to mention your second book.
Not yet.
Oh, okay. He's writing a second book. And yeah, love to carry on the conversation. Drop me a line on LinkedIn. Just let me know you connected here. And yes, thank you very much for joining, all of you. And we'll hand it over to Chelsea.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting, Alpesh and Giles. It's been a really interesting session. Thank you, everyone who has also been contributing to the session. I am looking for some Lunch Club hosts if anyone fancies having a go, or if anyone's hosted previously but would like to host again. My details are on the networking document, so please do get in touch because I absolutely love these lunch clubs. So thank you all for attending. I hope you all have a great weekend, and thank you again, Alpesh and Giles.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Well, that was good. Oh, Giles is gone as well. He's gone.
Giles has gone.
How was that? Was that okay?
Yeah, it's really good. Thank you so much for hosting. I've been through and popped a lot of the links onto the networking document as well, so that all the links from the chats are in there in case anybody wants to have a look.
Cool. And I think you share the list of people who attended, right, somewhere.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll send you an email with the networking document and all the information that you might need. And thank you again.
Hopefully that was a good one. I mean, you do these every week, so you know how if it was a good one or not. So
yeah, it was a good one, really good one. Thank you so much for hosting.
No worries. Anytime. I'll do it again anytime you want.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right. Have a good weekend. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.